I know that you want to fix this. I know it's hard that you don't know how to, but like, I'm not asking you to, right? Like, all I'm asking for is your heart.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back, and welcome to our most prestigious guest.
You're buttering me up already.
We try to start people high, so then if we bring them down low, it's not as bad,
Yeah, fair enough. Whenever you say everything I say is wrong, then I'll be like, well, at least he said I'm most prestigious.
Exactly.
Guest. I'll take it.
So, welcome to our guest. This is Nick Duer. He is an alum of St. Vincent. Graduated 2 years ago, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. I guess like 2.5.
Right. Yeah. It was crazy already. Time flies.
Yep.
He works in finance.
Yes.
Right. For Stanley Black & Decker.
You got it.
And is also an assistant residence hall director here at St. Vincent. So he graduated and left, and then came crawling back, right?
Yeah, now I'm living in a smaller room than I ever had while I was a student. So,
so Nick and I got to know each other, obviously, because we both went to St. Vincent. But when he was a freshman, I was a senior, and I was his residence hall prefect. So we don't call our RAs or residence assistants, whatever RAs, we call them prefects here, kind of like Harry Potter.
Right.
And they told us anyways that the reason for that is because they didn't want us to just be like people who enforced rules, but rather had a relationship.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because I think it was this last year, Father Paul we had a bonfire, and he brought that up. He's like, why do we call you guys prefects? And his point was supposed to be kind of like, we're supposed to be different from other RAs. And he's like, why are the school as prefects? And I wasn't even trying to mess around, but I was like, Harry Potter. And like, you could tell it completely threw him off. And everyone was like, come on, dude. And he was like, oh, well, not magic. So yeah, that's at least what the thought is. Yeah.
What's actually funny, because I've heard several people here say like that the structure of St. Vincent kind of reminds them of Hogwarts. Like the way people look, or like the basilica and everything.
Yeah, it works.
And actually, Brother Finbar, his mom was here recently, and I guess he grew up a huge fan of Harry Potter, and she told him, oh, I know why you want to be here, because you feel like you're living in Hogwarts.
I love it. Yeah, even going up the spiral staircases and everything.
Dude, exactly.
Yep.
So, yeah. Nick and I have shared a lot of good memories over the years.
Yeah.
Men's retreat, which we've talked about a lot. One of my favorite memories, though, I don't know if you know where I'm going with this.
Is it going to be The Greatest Showman?
Yes, it is.
Thinking the same thing.
So, I got into a huge kick into The Greatest Showman, like a year after the movie came out. But I got it on vinyl, and I had a record player that Tom had gotten me for Christmas, and I would blast that stuff, because it actually had good speakers too.
Yeah.
And I would blast it, and I got Nick on it.
I don't know. Because it was the same thing where like I was home for Christmas break, I think. And then I remember my mom took my siblings like a year before to watch. Like you said, it was a while after. And then I watched it once, and I watched like 2 or 3 more times before I left. So I think I saw it in your room. I was like, oh my gosh, I love this. And you're like, dude, I've listened to it like 1,000 times.
So there was one time I was playing the music, and Rewrite the Stars, which is my favorite soundtrack, or the song on the soundtrack, came on, and I know how much Nick liked it. So I opened my door, like turned all the volume, I was like, Nick! And then it's like comes on, and we start like dancing through the pod. And then I run down the one like sort of hallway, because the way a pod's set up is like a main room with like 2 H-shaped short hallways with all the rooms off of that. So I ran down that during like the big, drop of when they were singing together, and Nick like runs down the other hallway and into the bathroom, and as I come back down, he comes out of the bathroom, and we both jump at the same time and then collide with each other right in midair.
It couldn't have been more perfect timing.
It was amazing.
Like midair, and I see you out of the corner of my eye, like too late now.
Oh man, that was great.
Yeah, no, I loved it.
That's high on some of my favorite memories.
For sure. That's funny you bring it up, because I was thinking the same exact thing. How could that not be a high memory?
Absolutely, dude. That year was just senior year was kind of different for me. The fact that when I graduated, I realized that most of my friends who I keep in contact with after college had all been freshmen.
Yeah, that's weird to think about. Like, I've thought from my perspective, it's like, okay, I didn't really think I'd see you until I learned you're going to the monastery. I'm like, that's so cool. But that is interesting from your perspective. Like, it makes sense because we're still there. Mm-hmm. That's cool.
Yeah. Which, speaking of senior years,
Yeah.
So part of the reason that Nick is on today is because of I had actually asked him a long time ago because we like joking around, and I mentioned last week that had a buddy who we were on a pickleball team together. It's Nick. Yeah, we're the old guys, the geriatrics.
Watch out.
I'm planning on smoking these people.
Absolutely. I saw guys come in with bags with their own paddles, so I'm a little nervous, but we got them.
But yeah, I mentioned to Nick a while ago, like, hey, if there's ever like a topic you'd want to be on the podcast with talking about, I'll be more than happy. And that was like a while ago.
Yeah.
And then Nick reached out recently. He was like, hey, I think I actually got the topic. Mm-hmm. And correlates in ways too, senior year, right, for you?
Yeah.
We want to talk about something in the spiritual life that I'm sure everyone has experienced to some extent. Maybe they don't understand it, or maybe they've heard about it, or they're like, what the heck is going on in my life? Because that's what we call poverty of spirit, which Jesus says in Matthew 5 in the Beatitudes, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And for the longest time, I always scratched my head at that particular beatitude, because I'm like, what does it mean to be poor in spirit? Does that mean that I never receive consolation?
Right.
Does it mean that I admit weakness all the time? Or it's what does it actually mean? So since you're the guest, Nick, what do you understand poverty of spirit to be?
And I'm glad you say it as what I understand, because certainly I'm no great authority figure. But for me, it's a real understanding of acknowledging, and I think sometimes it comes when we're facing some of the hardest periods, or kind of brought to our knees in a sense. But it's the acknowledging that I'm limited, but I can bring all that to God in the sense of I'm not going to ignore my pain. I'm not going to, shove it away, because that's not going to help anybody. But it's saying, okay, this is, maybe what I'm experiencing. Maybe it's pain, maybe it's something else. But for me, that's kind of where it's coming in, is when I'm suffering, is acknowledging, okay, this is here. I'm really struggling with this, and I can't seem to figure it out, and that's okay. And I'm going to sit with this and really recognize, okay, maybe I can't fix everything. Maybe I can't control everything, which is hard for me. Yeah. And then from there is having to then say, okay, well, I know I'm not in control of this. I know I can't fix all this, but I know that God's on my side. And maybe it's not gonna be an instant fix, but I'm gonna at least bring it to Him and be like, here it is. Just all right, you know what? I'm done trying to do it all myself. Here you go. That's sort of how I experience or understand it.
Yeah. No, that's, I think, absolutely right. It's like a double recognition of where I am, but we're also where God is.
Yep, exactly.
And coming to that admission in the head can be very fast.
Right.
And we can divorce it very easily from how we actually act.
For sure.
To be God is totally in control and I'm not.
Yeah.
To say that over and over again, we could do very easily.
Yep.
But actually living that out, or bringing that in prayer, or having it actually affect our lives, is completely different.
Yeah. And I think that's where, and that's a great point, is because again, I think you said on a recent podcast, you said I recognize I never really fully trusted God. And I remember saying that, same spiritual director, not that long ago. And I think it's those times where it's when we sort of have an idea of how things, if we can think we can influence it enough, but it's the times where it's oh, I really don't know how this is gonna go, or I really don't know what to do. That's really where oh, this is what it's about. I'm out of control here. Yeah.
And I think so, I mentioned, Jesus says it in Matthew 5 as a beatitude, and I have something my novice master told me, and as I prayed into it more, how Christ on the cross himself is the fulfillment of all the beatitudes. And so, okay, where is his poverty of spirit? I see it anyways in when he cries out to God the Father, my God, why have you forsaken me? He is not trying to figure that out. He's speaking to God exactly how he feels, that he feels he has been demanded. But then what does he immediately follow that up with is, into your hands I commend my spirit. Right? So the poverty of spirit, that I feel that you have abandoned me, yet I still give all of who I am to you.
Yeah.
And that ultimate sacrificing of himself, of giving up the Spirit, is what causes the redemption of the world. And even in not feeling it, Christ still brought about the redemption. So relating that to like personal experience of poverty of spirit, for us, that's exactly what it needs to turn into. Is I feel this way. Do I feel that God is with me in it? Maybe not. But I still like not in a forceful like God take it like it's yours, but in an offering. Yeah. Like no matter what, you are here, even if I feel you are not. Yeah. And I feel this way. This is just
And what I like that you said there is that Christ gave himself, right? He's not giving solutions or what I think should happen. Like it's literally just like, here I am. Yeah. You know, like you said, you're not trying to solve anything. I think that's a beautiful part of it. It's like, that's what it is. Is like, here, like I'm giving myself to you.
Yeah. How have you either struggled or succeeded with that? Because I know, so you know how much I love the Clifton Strength Finders. Nick was very well versed in them. Yep. In some ways by me.
For sure.
But as far as your strengths go, like you are just like an executor out the wazoo.
Yeah,
it's like I think your whole framework of life.
I think it's like 5 of my top 7 strengths are executing. So just I think it's purple.
Yeah.
Very heavy up top. So that's hard for me because with how I'm built, I'm used to getting things done. I'm used to figuring things out. So the idea of saying like, I can't, or like I don't know how to figure this one out, I'm just gonna give myself, like, that's really challenging, and for me it feels wrong. Like it's not even so much as like, oh, like I think I can do it better. I'm sure it's certainly there. For me, it's a lot part of if I'm struggling with something, like if I just say like, oh God, well, like here, like I'm just giving myself this whole situation to you, feels like, well, isn't that lazy? Like don't I have to kind of earn my keep? Don't I need to do something to earn that? So it's hard for me to like think of like, no, you don't have to always do that. And I don't know if I can give, I guess, a personal experience with that, is like you talked about senior year as I think really when I first started struggling with this. And of course, always going to be a work in progress. It's not something easy to just figure out, I don't think. But during that year, there was a lot of hurt, a lot of insecurity, just pain that I had that was kind of underneath that sort of started coming to the surface. And I started having like really consistent, like intrusive, anxious thoughts. And I get these, and something little could set it off. But like how I was trying to approach it is like, okay, if I have this, like I need to figure out why it doesn't need to bother me, or why this thing that is bothering, or like what I think might be a problem, why it's not. And like anxiety, like I think sometimes we think it's like, oh, okay, we just avoid it at all costs. No, I mean, anxiety has its purpose, right? Yeah. I've heard it described as like an alarm, right? So like there's a fire, it's telling you like, hey, you're in danger, you need to get out of this. And that's a good thing. But like if the alarm is too sensitive, so like I'm in the dorms, every time I use the toaster, the smoke alarm goes off. It could be perfect golden brown, not a speck of black on it, and it's like beep. So in that case, it's like, okay, then that's too much. And that's sort of where I was at, where it was like, okay, my alarm was going off about the slightest things all the time. So like what was happening is I'm trying to put out a fire that's not there. And like it felt very hot, but like I would just spin in circles. And I was struck really deep in that for a while. And I remember one time being in adoration. And this is an experience, like I mentioned, like I talked to you about afterwards. But like I was sitting there, and then I don't know what got me or motivated me to start journaling, but I really felt like God was like, here's some words that I have for you. And I would write something down, like a sentence, and then I'd sit there and look at Jesus, and I wait. And then maybe something else would come to me, and I write it down. And it felt like very personal, like God giving me words. And I remember asking you after, like, is that happen? Like, am I crazy, But like in that, and I can look back at it, which is really great, is, what I have written is from God is like, I know that you want to fix this. I know it's hard that you don't know how to, but like, I'm not asking you to, right? Like all I'm asking for is your heart. And like that for me, like hit me like, oh, and like even later on, like it says like, like, cast your anxieties on me. And it says, yes, Nick, that's okay.
Yeah.
You know, like, you're allowed to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And I, by no means was I like fixed then, but that's a process that I really had to work through, is to say, okay, like, these thoughts are coming in my head again. I don't have to fix them. I don't have to figure them out. I can feel them, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to feel that, like, I'm feeling anxious, but at the end of the day, like, it's okay to not figure them out in a sense. And I'm just going to lift them up to God. And that was an important learning for me that I'm continuously working on now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's so good, because it takes away our, like, human desire to always, like, respond immediately to a problem.
Yep.
And thinking that, oh, you know, especially with those things, if I may, like, that seem like very little, is to be like, well, also, like, why would God want to be bothered with these things? Like, you do have, like, legitimate other issues that I need to bring to God. Like, this is like, that's a waste of time.
Yep.
So I need to take care of those ones, so then I can spend prayer or whatever taking care of these other things. And he wants, like, the most minute details.
Yep.
And he wants the details not because he wants us to then be like, piece them out in front of him.
Yeah.
And be like, okay, so I come to prayer and I, like, lay everything out and I present it to God, and as I'm presenting it, I figure it out at the same time. That is no. And I totally do that.
Yes.
That prayer is either like a therapy session that, like, oh, I just dump everything on God and, like, we're good, right?
Yep.
Or it's like, okay, this is our strategic planning session, guys.
Yes.
Like, let's figure this out together. He wants the details because he wants us to realize he can take care of every detail, not that we need to sit down and figure it out.
Right.
But I know that is a huge temptation for me, is, like, as soon as, like you said, an alarm goes off, it's either what is wrong with you or what is wrong with someone else.
Yeah.
And I want to immediately, like, push all of those buttons to fix this problem, you know. And I'm reminded of Christ saying, you know, look at the lilies of the field. You know, they don't spin or sow. They don't do anything, right? Yeah. They're not trying to figure out solutions. But I would tell you, even Solomon in all of his splendor was not, like, glorified like a single one of them. So for you, he says, like, you don't add a single moment to your life by worrying. And for the longest time, I was like, yeah, I know that. I know that. But actually, when I sat down to think about it, I think that is actually, like, the fundamental temptation. Is, like, I think that if I worry about this enough or think about this enough, like, I'll extend something down the road. Like, I'll extend my happiness or my contentment with myself, or I'll look better in the sight of other people because I have it figured out for longer. Rather than just, like, being okay to sit there and just be weak about it.
Right. Yeah, no, and I get that for sure. And especially you talking about prayer, like, I do the same thing. Like, okay, I'm going to come, and now I'm just going to problem solve and overthink. And that's not what prayer is in that moment. And I like a way that I think about it too is, like, when I was young, I had something called croup cough.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Okay, so you know what that is. Yeah. Okay. So I don't know what your parents did, but, like, really, what worked really for me, the only thing that worked is, like, if we went outside and sat in the cold.
Yep. Yeah. My dad would take me on night walks.
Yeah. Okay. Yep. So that's what we would go out on my porch, and that's one of my earliest memories is sitting on my mom's lap, and it was like like a cell tower in the distance, like, blinking light, and that's we would literally just bundle up and sit there, and, like, I guess that's sort of how I think of it sometimes, is, like, we weren't necessarily doing anything, right? My mom wasn't giving me medicine. I wasn't gurgling salt water or something like, like. But, like, I just sat in her warmth and with her, and, like, that by itself was healing. And I think sometimes that's how I can think of it with God, is, like, okay, like, I don't necessarily need to do something, right? Like, I can literally just rest in him, and that is healing. That's what's it's more about the relationship with him versus, like, fixing the problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How do you rest then in prayer? Like, what are ways you find to do that? Because I know for me, like, that, it's such a temptation, like, with Achiever, you know, that, like, prayer has to have some goal.
Right. Yeah.
And if I walk away without feeling like, oh, like, prayer was successful today, right? Then that's a huge thing. It's like feeling like, oh, like, was my prayer successful or not? That, like, oh, well, I did it wrong.
Yeah.
Or, oh, that was a waste of time. And I know my spiritual director, which is the same guy, Father Tom Ackman, the GOAT.
Incredible.
We'll just say, oh, it's like, just rest with the Lord.
Yeah.
And, like, I try, but it's so hard.
Oh,
So hard.
absolutely. Yeah, and one of the things, especially if you're struggling with something, is that I know we talked about. He says is the idea of pressing your wounds into Jesus, pressing your wounds into Christ, and like when you first hear that's like, what? Sounds kind of weird.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
like, what do you mean? But like as I pray, that's one area for me that again, it's not about solving it. It's about, okay, I'm bringing this to Jesus. So like for me, what that looks like is like if I start getting anxious in prayer, like you said, like I'm trying to figure things out and it's just going wrong, it's like my chest will actually tighten up. So like I'll feel that, and that's what I'll take. I'm like, okay, like I'm gonna take this tight chest. I'm gonna imagine Jesus there, like with his wounds, like bloody, all sort of stuff, and I'm gonna press it into him, press it into his heart, and I'm just gonna sit there in that. Like I'm not gonna be like, Lord, what do I do here? It's just gonna be okay, almost like as if like it's like giving someone a hug, right? Just sitting with that. Something else I like with that is like I'll imagine him like during the agony in the garden. Like if I have tears or just feeling really sad, it's like imagine like resting my cheek on his and like feeling his tears of blood, right?
Wow.
You know,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
and that's something where it's again like I'm not getting an answer, you know. I'm bringing that to Jesus, just bringing myself to him.
Yeah. And just sitting with it, acknowledging you're sitting with it, but knowing that you're not sitting in it alone.
Exactly. And I think that's important. And right, that acknowledgement piece is really important. Because again, it's not about like, okay, I'm just going to kind of ignore it. Everything's okay. Because that doesn't help anybody, right? Even, you know, from like a counseling perspective, right? Yeah. The best way to heal from, you know, whether it's anxious thoughts, whatever it is to go through them, right? There's even, it's exposure therapy whereby like, let's say you're afraid of snakes. And like you slowly expose to almost like get over that fear. So like maybe start by thinking about snakes, then you might draw a snake, you might look at pictures of them, and eventually you get to the point of holding them, right? If you just ignore it, that's always going to be eating at you. Mm-hmm. But like if you go through it, that's where the healing comes. It's extremely difficult. But then the other side of that is you hear that, it's like, okay, well, I just need to white knuckle this, you know, and like just get over it. It's like, well, no, it's not that either, right? It's also being able to, the important part is bringing that to prayer, and right, and then lifting that up to God and being like, okay, like very directly, I'm gonna sit with this. Like it's not like not doing anything in a sense doesn't mean not thinking about it. It means like intentionally sitting with it. Yeah.
An active rest. At the same time.
Yes, I think that's a good way to put it.
No, that's a really like well put analogy with the whole snake and exposure therapy, because we can really treat like difficulties in the spiritual life as just like hurdles to get over, rather than just like things to just be in,
feel it,
and especially like, you know, from a religious life perspective, that is incredibly amplified. Because now like I'm expected, at least I tell myself I'm expected to be an example or a witness or, you know, a guide, or just like a teacher on all of these matters. And when people, you know, ask me like, oh, how do I do these things? I'm like, bro, I don't know. Like I am sitting in the chapel having just as much difficulty letting go of myself. But then for me, like the added expectation is, well, you have to, because like other people waiting for you to do this. And the more we also have that kind of those things, either like, oh, other people, whether it's a significant other, you know, husband or wife, children, religious, you know, your brothers and sisters in your community, or like the faithful, whoever it is, if you're saying like, they need me to fix this, like they're waiting for this to happen, or I can't be as good in ministry until I've taken care of these things, is what you're going to do then is like skip all of those steps and just grab the snake, and then you're going to be freaking out. And instead of like letting yourself get there and being okay with that.
And that's a good point that I like that you brought up, is it's the same with other people. Like I think a lot of people probably have had the experience, whether it's a significant other or just like someone in your life, not to generalize. I think guys are pretty kind of be bad. At least I'm bad at this, so maybe that's my experience. But it's like, if, you know, a lot of times like maybe whether it's a woman in our life, especially, I think sometimes they'll bring something that they're struggling with, which is great. And like the guy's response a lot of times is like, well, this is how we fix it.
Yeah.
And like, that's not at all what they want usually, right? There's absolutely times for problem solving, but a lot of times, and that's, a specific example, but that's with anybody, right? Is like, sometimes you just need somebody to sit and like see that, right? There's, I think it's David Kessler talks about grief, and like, he says like, everybody grieves in different ways, but the one thing in common between everyone is that grief demands a witness, right? It demands someone to sit there and just see you in it. And that's even like, I've listened to Father Boniface talk about spiritual direction. He talks about accompaniment, and just like the gift of presence. So I think it's a great point, is that like, if that's how we can best love others, wouldn't it make sense that's how we can best love ourselves too?
Yeah. I like that.
Yeah.
How have you been able to sit in that presence, or like what are some like concrete steps you've been able to make to, because you said, certainly when you started struggling with it and like the anxiety was like really crazy, but it seems like you have not a total command, obviously, because we never
absolutely
will,
not.
never will get to that
nowhere
point.
Close.
But at least you have made better steps. What were some practical things maybe you could give to other people?
So the one example we talked about, pressing your wounds into Jesus, I think that's beautiful. Another way, where if you're thinking of like more like an imaginative type of prayer that's helped sometimes, is people talk about like taking your problems and like setting them at Jesus' feet, right? Like sometimes I'll lay on my stomach and like imagine it's kind of sitting there. It's like, all right, here, and one time it felt really like, okay, Jesus took those and he laid down next to me. And like, that's like, another wow moment. That's a way. There's other like then specific prayers, right, that I think have been useful for me. One is like, it's a typical one that, I feel like most people hear from when you're young, is a serenity prayer, right? So like, God grant me the serenity to accept things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. I think that's beneficial because there are times that we're absolutely called to act, right?
Absolutely.
Spiritual poverty doesn't mean you just sit and like let life beat the crap out of you, right? But like, there's another part of that I didn't realize it was a longer prayer. I don't know if you knew there's more to it.
So like, everyone quotes that line.
That's all I thought it was. But like, AA is, I think, kind of where it came from. But like, there's a whole prayer. Another part of it that I really liked is accepting hardship as a pathway to peace, taking as Jesus did the sinful world as it is, not as I would have it. Right. So again, it's an acceptance of this is where things are, but like taking that path as like to peace. And something that my counselor did with me one time was, she's like, okay, write that prayer and then make 2 columns, and you can have a column of things I can control and then things I can't control, and write down those things in there, and then write your own personal serenity prayer of like things that you are like, I'm struggling with in this moment. Write that out. That's one example of something that was good for me. And again, it's good because you get both those sides. It's not tossing up your hands, I'm not going to be active in my life, but it's also recognizing that there's a lot out of my control, and I'm going to surrender that to God. Another one that's a more like structured type of prayer is a surrender novena. I think you talked about that. That's a favorite of a lot of people. But there's, if you've never prayed it, there's a short passage that you'll read each day, and then there's the same prayer that you'll repeat 10 times each day, right? And that prayer is, oh Jesus, I surrender myself to you, take care of everything. And the one passage that's in it, I made note of it because I think it really is a good like example of like what spiritual poverty is. So it says, surrender to me does not mean to fret, to be upset, or to lose hope. Nor does it mean offering to me a worried prayer, asking me to follow you and change your worry into prayer. Surrender means to placidly close the eyes of the soul, to turn away from thoughts of tribulation, and to put yourself in my care so that only I act, saying you take care of it. And again, for me, like, you take care of it feels like, oh, that's not right, right? Like, I'm supposed to be doing something. But like, in there, that idea of like placidly close the eyes of the soul and like rest. And the surrender novena has been big for me in times where I'm really struggling. It's like, okay, like a lot of beautiful passages in there, but then that prayer of Jesus, like, I surrender myself to you, take care of everything. That's another prayer that's been really good for me. And then just like a last one I found is sometimes I think if we're struggling so much, it can be hard or intimidating to come into prayer for whatever reason. Maybe you're not trusting God and you don't want to talk to him in that moment, or for me, we talked about how like I'll get anxious, if I start praying, I'm just going to start overthinking. I don't want to do that again.
So might as well avoid it.
Exactly. So I'll just not do it. And I remember talking to Father Tom about that. And he was like, well, tell him that. Like, that's how you can pray. It's like, it's to come in and say, like, God, like, I really don't want to pray because, like, I'm scared of getting anxious, or like, scared I'll start overthinking, or I'll hear something that I don't like. I think that's a beautiful way to start. And I mean, one time recently, like, I was having a tough day, and I talked with a good buddy of mine, and like, I said ahead of time, I was like, I don't want advice.
Yeah.
I don't want to figure out. I just want you to sit here. And then a few days later, I was like, I guess I can also do that with God, because I was having a day where I was like absolutely avoiding praying, because like I don't want to hear. I feel like it's going to go bad. And I was like, you know what? Pray, like, God, like, I really don't want like any revelation right now. I really just want to share my hurt with you. And like, sometimes I think that's a beautiful way to start the prayer that can kind of get over that hump, that intimidation. And then God can like infuse his grace into that and bring your prayer. Like, he just needs like the little bit that we can give, and he can make it more. So, yeah.
All right, let's see. There's so many things that you were saying that I'm like, oh, I want to
Sorry,
start that.
I'm talking way too much.
No, it's good. I hope I can remember all of them.
Yeah.
Because I just like just getting more and more excited. So one of the first things you said was like, having this kind of surrender disposition, or kind of leaning into a poverty of spirit, does not mean that at times we don't act.
Right.
And I think, obviously, going back to the chief example of prayer and humanity, Christ, that he was on mission for 3 years before he went to the cross, right? He was acting, he was doing all of those things. But then when it came time for his greatest work, that's where when he surrendered fully, right? So that in ways, like, the preparation, or like all the good work, things you might be doing, will probably pale in comparison to the work that God can actually do for you and with you when you just completely surrender.
Right. No, I love that. And even that you might be acting, and something, I think sometimes people get caught up in like, well, are my actions giving me the results that I want to expect? Sometimes you might be acting and then have to surrender. It's like, well, I don't know if this is going to work out.
Yeah, right.
But like, God, like, if you wanted to, like, I'm giving that to you. Yeah.
Yeah. A second thing was, don't pray that I turn your worry into a prayer. Like, that's a huge one. It's like, all right, God, like, I'm worried about this, but I'm just gonna, like, take care of this. It's like, no, I don't even need you to like feel like by praying about it that, because like for me, the back and forth, I overthink a lot of this kind of stuff too. It's like, okay, I'm not gonna pray for a solution, but I need to at least have said the prayer. Right. And then I'll feel like, okay, that's at least getting us somewhere. Yeah. It's like, no, yes, God wants to know our needs, right? That's why Jesus said for us to call God our Father. But he also just like literally wants us to enter and just rest. Yeah. And if prayer is not seen as a place of rest, then that is definitely something we need to come to see it as. Yeah. So that from the surrender novena always hits me. It's like, don't change worries into prayer. Just be okay to sit with them. Right. Yeah. And I'm here.
Yep. Absolutely. No. Yeah. I love it. And that's what we've talked about, is like, for me, it feels like I had to give him something.
Yeah, exactly.
But like, no. And it's literally just about the relationship with him. And for me, that's how I relate to like sitting on my mom's lap.
Yeah.
Just
absolutely.
resting. Yeah.
And then the last thing I was thinking about is when our experience is actually kind of the opposite. So we've been talking a lot about like poverty of spirit when we're coming in, feeling all these things or being anxious about a lot of things. But I think another aspect of poverty of spirit that is not really felt is when you actually come in feeling nothing. So when you feel like you, and you just want to feel God's presence. You want to be able to rest. Yeah. And they're like, no, nothing's really bad going on in my life. And I'm not really, tempted in any way. I'm not really worried about anything. I just feel very dry. Yeah. Yeah. Kind of unconsoled by God. And I would love to just rest with him, but it doesn't even seem like,
feels like I'm a sin here.
Yeah, exactly. And that's another thing to then turn around and surrender as well. Is like, Lord, I don't feel anything, and I trust that you're here, and I'm just going to like push into the fact that I feel nothing. Yeah. So like we could feel anxious, and that sometimes almost might be like consoling. Like, at least I can bring these things to Christ, or at least I can sit here knowing He's with me in my anxiety. But when we go into prayer feeling that He's not even sitting with us, it's like, well, how do I bring that? How do I bring anything to when I don't feel anything? Yeah. Right? That for me is like, that's just so difficult for me to grasp. surrendering dryness and surrendering, desolation.
Yeah. So for you, you're talking about that, like, after you bring up that initial, like, you're saying you can even bring that dryness to God of, like, I'm not feeling anything. Because I know that feeling where it's, like I said, it feels like you're just sitting there.
Yeah.
What do you do after that? Like...
The only thing I can do is just tell myself over and over again, God is here. God is here.
Yeah.
The Lord is here. And here with me.
Yeah.
And I might have to repeat that to myself 1,000 times that hour. And when distractions come up, it's almost as like, well, I don't want to feel dry, so at least I'll like distract myself with this.
Yeah.
It'd be like, okay, like, Lord, I'm distracted with this because I don't feel anything. So that's just, honestly, I feel like that's where my prayer has become most honest, is when I don't feel anything. Yeah. And it's up and down, but I do something I remind myself of often is, the last words of Christ in the Gospel of Matthew, which is, behold, I am with you always, even to the end of the age.
Yeah. I remember the first time reading those words, I was like, mic drop. Like, that's the best way to end a gospel.
And I'm ascending. Goodbye.
Yeah. Wow. That's beautiful. Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't really have any concrete, like, other things to do with that, because, like, the last thing I would just is, like, acceptance, but not as like resignation, because like resignation, I think both in like when we're anxious or when we're not feeling anything, is just be like, well, this is how it is. Right. No. Acceptance is to say this is how it is. But does that necessarily mean that this has to be how it stays, or that God is not working if I don't see it? No. Resignation would also be like, well, whatever. But something Father Boniface actually told us in class on Wednesday was, wherever you're feeling or wherever you're in right now is the place that God desires you to be, because this is how he will make you a saint the fastest.
Wow. Yeah. No, and I like what you're saying there, is that because that's the other end, right? Is people can shift towards, well, I'm just done. Like, I'm not, know, and that's like widespread, like, society today, right? Like, even I forget what it's called, but people like our age who feel like, oh, I can't get ahead financially, so I'm just gonna blow all my money because it doesn't matter anyways, right? And we can absolutely do that spiritually too. And I think it's a great point. It's like, it's saying like, no, like, this is where I'm at. Doesn't mean you have to stay there, right? And Father Boniface talked about that. We keep multiple references to Father Boniface here, but like at a FOP is like, that like, like, I guess suffering like that, God uses that, and that can be good. Now, you should work, right? Like, if it's a type of suffering, like, say like it's through medication or whatever it is, that's good, right? Like, it's not like you have to like, oh, like, this is just how life has to be. Like, no, absolutely, we should work through that. Or if it's like dryness, like, okay, like, yeah, you should seek out, God's presence, but like, so it's not, toss up the hands. It's like, this is where I'm at, and that's okay. And now I'm gonna try and move forward with it.
Yeah, and I think just to go back to the words that you said jumped out to you, like the placid closing of your eyes. Like, there's a peaceful, like, okay. It's I think Father Barnabas, something he told me to sometimes just to do in prayer is just sit there and say, I'm okay. Yeah. It's okay.
Wow. Yeah, see, that was the first time that I ever heard, like, really spiritual poverty stuck out to me, was talking to him. Yeah. Funny, all these overlaps. So
dude.
Yeah.
We're very blessed at St. Vincent.
Absolutely. Yeah. So.
Yeah, man. I don't know if there's anything else that you feel like you wanted to close
I mean, I think
or...
we talked of a lot. I think, you gave an example, like, Jesus is the perfect example. I think in other places with Lazarus, right? Where, shortest verse, Jesus wept, right? Like, just, then he works, right? Then he goes and raises them, but first he feels it. Right, he feels it with the people. So I think just plenty of examples from the ultimate role model. That's all I got.
Sweet. Yeah. Well, good. Well, thank you, Nick. Yeah, just appreciate you coming out and sharing your own experiences.
Yeah.
And just being a witness to, especially nowadays, there's like this duality of like how men should be.
Right.
Either like totally passive in every sense,
Yep.
or like totally macho and
Yeah.
like, you know, and poverty of spirit is actually a beautiful place in between.
Yes. Yeah.
So yeah, just appreciate you.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me on. Listen to all your episodes. Love the episodes. Great to be on and have this conversation. So
yeah, and let me know what you think about when you hear your own voice.
I think I was like, I don't think I'm actually going to listen to it. I was like, I don't know if I want to hear my voice, so we'll see. Maybe I'll listen to the start of it.
Let's see. Yeah. What I tell people is they probably haven't heard the sound of their own voice over a good microphone, because I always hated the sound of my own voice. Now, after listening to it for like 50 some odd hours of editing, I've kind of grown used to it, but generally we hear our voices recorded over bad microphones.
Yeah.
So just,
we'll see.
We'll
Hopefully
see.
it's not
Anyway,
like nails on a chalkboard.
Well, if it isn't, mine voice is worse. But how about we close in a prayer?
Absolutely, I love that.
In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Dear Heavenly Father, we just give you praise and thanks for this time and for your Holy Spirit's presence here with Nick and I, that we might be able to hopefully bring more people to your Son through this understanding of poverty of spirit. Thank you for the gift of Nick that he has been to me and to so many people, and that the man that you are growing and the character that you are building within him, both a man of action but also a man of receptivity and surrender. Continue to grow that spirit within him and within me, and may, through the intercession of Our Lady, we all be servants of the Lord who do his will with perfect surrender. We pray, Hail Mary,
full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
All right. Thank you all. Have a wonderful day.
Peace.